Let's say you work at Meta. According to internal research, people with more friends have less engagement. Now, the lead analysts suspect that Facebook's people you may know feature, a feature where Facebook recommends you non-friends, cause this reduction in engagement. As a part to solve this problem, you have to design an A/B test to confirm. Hey everyone, my name is Ishan. I have around 11 years experience in the field of data science and analytics, and I'm currently working as a data science lead with Google. Before that, I worked with Meta for 6 years, for around 9 years in the product company, and 2 years I work as a data scientist in a consulting. Let's quickly break this problem into key parts. So first is this problem is sounding more like one metric is going up and another metric is going down kind of problem, or we can call it a classic trade-off problem. So first thing is there is an internal research and it highlighted people who have more friends have less engagement. Basically, we can assume that people who have sent generally more friend requests and have more friends in their network, they are likely to spend less time, or sorry, they are likely to be less engaged. One of the hypotheses which we are pursuing here is Facebook has a feature called people you may know, which is causing this trade-off where people who have more friends have less time or less engagement. So how should we go about validating or negating this hypothesis? So now let me walk you all through how I would have approached this problem. So whenever I get these problem, I generally try to break it down into 4 parts. First part is where I try to understand the question. I try to understand the product flow, try to think of myself as a user or as a product manager in this situation and get a mental picture of the entire problem. And if I'm not clear about any metrics, any feature, I'll ask as a clarifying question. After that, I would go about establishing whatever hypothesis or whatever claim is mentioned in this question. I would first validate it. Then I would think about how should I go and check this problem, so whether designing a test or doing some analysis. And in the last part, I go and share some recommendations. So let's just follow this framework. So as I say, in the first part, I would be spending more times understanding this problem statement. Or best thing we can say, I would be paraphrasing my understanding of this question and verifying it with my interviewer. So here, few things which caught my attention. So first is people with more friends. So here, I would like to clarify with my interviewer, even though it sounds very clear, I would still listen. When we say people with more friends, does this mean people who have more friends in their network? Does this mean people who receive more friend requests or people who send more friend requests? Which people are we specifically referring to? Most likely, my interviewer will say people who have more friends. Now you can still clarify, hey, whether they receive more friend requests or they send more requests. Most likely your interview say that both are like equal. Now, second part is have less engagement. Now, we need to be very mindful of this word called less engagement. How are we defining engagement here? There could be two definitions. It could be, are people spending less time on Facebook? Now, spending time on Facebook could be you're talking to your friend, you might be watching a video on the video tab, you're spending time on Marketplace, you are just scrolling the feed, looking into some articles, or you might actually be interacting with your friend's content. Second part is you might be still spending the same time or more time, but it's just you're not engaging with the content. It means you're not liking or you're not commenting, you're not sending any kind of emoticons. So this is a part which we have to clarify with the interviewer upfront. Let's say for this discussion, we say engagement is equivalent to less time spent, as well as the person or the user in this problem are engaging less with the content. So basically reacting, commenting less, as well as spending less time. But this is something we need to clarify. Now, the next important thing which stood out for me is Facebook's people you may know feature, where a feature Facebook recommends you non-friends. So now, if you guys are not aware about this feature, you can ask some code clarifying questions. Hey, can you tell me about more about this feature? Or how does a user can access this kind of feature? What generally happens there? Generally, if you have prepared for your interview well, you should be aware about some popular feature. In those situations, what I do, I clarify my understanding with my interviewer. So I can say, hey, what I remember from people you may know feature, this is more like a recommendation bar where you see a carousel kind of feature, and it shows you some connections which you might be interested to connect with or follow it. So generally, if you go to Friends tab or generally in newsfeed, you end up seeing these kind of recommendations. This is where I'll clarifying my understanding. Now, I think this line is pretty straightforward because that this feature is causing reduction in engagement. And now here the problem has become slightly easy for us because we are explicitly asked, how would you design an A/B test to confirm whether or not this hypothesis is correct? In your interview situation, you guys might get this as a question. How would you validate this hypothesis? So they might not even say that you have to perform A/B testing, and they would like to keep it more open-ended. So I hope so far you guys have understood how to ask the clarifying questions, and you might have got a good understanding. Now I'll move to the second phase of my framework where I'll be still establishing whether the observation in this question is correct or not. So as a data scientist, we should not be taking anything at face value. We should double check it with metrics. So I would say if I have access to internal data, I would go and try to see, basically do a very basic root cause analysis that what is this decline. So firstly, I would start with defining what is engagement. Let's say here, for the purpose of this question, we are saying engagement is, we are looking at two metrics. First is time decline in time spent. Second thing is number of comments, reactions, stories, views, everything, anything where you are engaging with any organic or paid content on the platform, we are calling it engagement. Now, I would like to see if it is happening over the period of time we are seeing this decline, or is it a drastic decline? Because if it is a drastic decline, it is highly unlikely that a small feature or a change in user behavior is driving this change. It is most likely happening due to some bug or some sudden effect. Could be like Facebook got banned on some countries, or there is some internet outages which could have led to this situation. Otherwise, any metric does not move drastically. And when I say drastically, we are talking about, let's say, 2-3% drop within a week. That does not happen unless there is an external factor acting on it. So that is first part. I would try to understand on what time frame is this happening. Most likely, as this question is designed that within hypothesis, people you may know features driving this decline down. So our interviewer is going to give us input that, hey, this decline happened over a period of time. Then you would also start with doing some more analysis. You would be like, okay, I would try to see if this decline is happening more on the new users of Facebook or old users of the Facebook. Second thing, I would also try to see this decline. Maybe we can have some kind of line chart, how many people have friends, some people using people you may know versus people, users who have not never used people you may know feature, and see if there is a trend that people who are using people you may know, they have less engagement versus people who are not using, they have high engagement. So establishing some, performing some exploratory data analysis and establishing some visual observation. So overall, I'll try to get a sense check if this hypothesis is correct or not. So most likely, as you guys, as this question is directly asked to us, our interviewer will say everything which will proceed us to the next step. So they will give us input like, okay, this is happening across all the user segment, which I have mentioned, like new versus old. It is not a sudden decline. It is a decline over a period of time. And most likely when I ask if I look into the time spent or engagement distribution of users who have used people you may know versus users who have not used people you may know, we will see there's a decline only on the users who are having this feature, people you may know. So just to continue the question, this is the kind of input they will give us. So now we have found a hypothesis. Now the next part would be validating these hypotheses. So through this part, what these companies are trying to check is your knowledge of causal inference. Because if you start your career as a product data scientist, or if you get into a career of product data scientist, we always have a lot of hypotheses around our users, and we build new product features on the basis of these hypotheses. So causal inference becomes very important. Now, A/B testing is not the only technique to do causal inference. There are some other techniques. You can use quasi-experimental techniques as well. But in most of the cases, A/B testing is more like a gold standard. So everyone wants to check your knowledge. So they will ask you, how would you check whether this hypothesis is correct or not? Okay. So in this situation, whenever we are running any A/B test, now I'm going to share a framework with all of you. I'm writing down it on my notepad. So there are few things which we all have to do when we are thinking about A/B testing. The first step is hypothesis formulation. And here you guys should be calling out what is your null hypothesis. Second is what is your alternate hypothesis. This is always step one. Let me write it as step one. In the second part, what we do, we check if there is network effect. Because network effect is basically considered before deciding your randomization unit. Step three is you define your randomization unit. It could be user, it could be session, it could be device, and sometimes a cluster of any of these three, depending upon network effect or a cluster. Okay, this is your step three. Once you establish this, then you talk about power analysis to estimate the sample size. Okay. And once you have done the power analysis, you decide the length of experiment. Then in step six, you do AA test and some basic sanity check to ensure your experiment setup is correct. And in step seven, you do experiment analysis and you share recommendations based on experiment. So this is generally an end-to-end flow for our A/B testing. And that is what we have to communicate in our interview. So let's see if I have to apply this framework in this question. Okay. Let's say for the sake of simplicity, I'm saying for the sake of simplicity here by engagement, I'm saying time spent per use. This is the metric I'm talking about. You guys can also talk about number of likes, comments, any metric you can check, but you can use, but here just for going through the question, this is the metric I'm using. So what would be your null hypothesis? Null hypothesis is there is no change in time spent of the user, regardless they use people you may know or not. Alternate hypothesis would be there is some change. Okay. We will start with this. Now, the second important point is network effect. So network effect is basically whenever we are running any experiment, all the experiment units should be independent of each other. So let's say you and I are part of some experiment. So whatever activity I do should not be influencing your activity. But in some cases, it's not possible. Let's think about Facebook or Instagram as an example. If I am user of Instagram or sorry, Facebook, and if I start commenting more on your photos, liking more on your photos, or I start putting more stories, most likely either you will reply me back or you will start engaging with my stories. So in either scenario, what will happen if I am part of test and you are part of control? It's just because I am engaging more on the platform, you will engage more. Similarly, if I'm your friend, but I suddenly stop posting a lot at all, I'm not giving you, like I'm not putting any stories, no new photos, most probably you will stop thinking about me. And maybe it will indirectly impact your engagement with the platform because earlier I was posting a lot. So you were engaging with my content a lot. Now, one of your friend who used to post a lot has gone away. And maybe that takes down your engagement as well. So that's why in this situation, here we have also network effect, right? So network effect is, we have to think about network effect, and generally there are different techniques. But if you guys go to about how Meta product handle network effect, they have written their own article, how they go about creating clusters to check for network effect. Now, once you have identified that there is a network effect problem, which we need to apply in the solution, you will keep on proceeding further. So now your randomization unit would here become like a cluster. which we would be creating. And then again, power analysis and all things would be on the basis of those clusters. You guys can refer to this article. Meta has talked a lot about how to design experiment for network effect, what are the pitfalls and how to handle those. But from an interview from an interview perspective, you even recognizing that there is a network effect happening is going to give you brownie point, and that is how you are going to stand apart in comparison to other candidates. Okay. Then moving on, once you have conducted all analysis, then you will check the setup. So we would do AA test to avoid any kind of sample ratio mismatch. And then while performing the analysis, we'll talk about how we avoid p hacking, p peaking, and all those kind of situation. And eventually we will run an A/B test result where, let's say, one arm is controlled, where people are still seeing the people you may know feature, and another is test where, let's say, we are not showing this feature. And then we will see if during the experiment period, is there a static decline in the engagement or static increase in the engagement as soon as we stop showing people you may know feature. Okay. So this is how you generally design your experiment. Now let's quickly learn about some kind of questions which you can expect in interview specifically around this kind of experiment. So first thing, which I have seen very frequently, people asking that how would you design A/B test? Because we have made this feature available to everyone. So it's not like it is not available to everyone. It is already available. Now we are doing some post facto analysis to understand the impact. So how can we do that? Ideally, if we were launching this feature, you would have just done the A/B testing where you have a test and a control and you can measure the effect. But here it's reverse. Feature is available to everyone. So to handle these kind of situation, we use a concept called ablation. Okay, let me just write it. It's called ablation. So basically, it's reverse of A/B test. So what's the situation here? People you may know feature is available to all users. Now, from our user base, we will sample, test, and control. Control will keep on seeing PYMK feature, whereas test will cease seeing the feature. And then we analyze our whatever was our null hypothesis or engagement metric. We will monitor the change on that metric over a period of time. So this is called ablation, where earlier what happens in A/B testing, none of your user have this feature available, and then we find a small group of user and we start showing them this feature. In ablation, we do the reverse. Everyone is seeing the feature, and then we find a group of users which are like a random sample, and we stop their access to the feature. So that is called ablation. So ablation would be more useful concept. Now, second interview question, which is getting very popular these days. In real world, if you are running these kind of experiments, you will never see any statistically significant result in a day or two, or even in a month, because these are very subtle changes and it will take a lot of time for user to react. It's not a very disruptive change. So what we do, we learn a concept, and I have seen people using different terminologies. Some people call it holdback test, and some people call it holdout. So holdback and holdout is nothing. These are again like A/B test, but what we do, we find we find a random sample, and then we monitor the behavior for a longer period of time. So generally, when we are launching a product, if our A/B test has given good result, we want to launch it to as many users as possible, so that if there are gains coming, we get it sooner. But to do a long-term impact, that what has been the impact of this feature, we find in that holdout, we again find a small test and a small control, and we never show feature to test. Everyone else see the new feature. And then what we do, we basically compare holdback test and holdback control to see if there are some kind of changes are coming. Because whenever there are some product launches, which are generally expected to slowly change user behavior, it takes time. It does not become statistically significant during your experiment. Okay. So generally, these are some common problems which you can expect in interview, and these are the kind of follow-up questions which you can expect in your interview. So to practice more questions like this and learn about the basics of concepts which I have talked about, you guys can refer to interview query. They have very popular interview questions which you guys can use for practice. And even if you go to the practice concept, there are interview questions, challenges, and if you go to learning path, all these concepts which I talked about, they have done detailed write-ups with some video examples on how to go about learning these examples. So I hope this problem and my approach was useful to you and it will come handy in your interviews. Thank you, everyone.